Thank you, Miguel. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Lim Beng Chu, for inviting me and my colleagues to the Kyogen workshop yesterday and today's symposium. How do I start? I wanted to comment earlier about the question of Professor Gulam regarding this foreigners who go to Japan to study Japanese theater form like Kyogen, and what do they do with that? Because this is going to be part of my presentation. What did I do with my exposure to Japanese performance traditions when I went back to the Philippines after studying in Japan for about 8.5 years. And I also want to comment again to Professor Gulam's statement earlier that there is no major theater form in the Philippines. That hurts, but there is some truth to that.
I'm in the South.
There is some truth to that in the sense that we don't have what you can consider a national theater. No, we don't identify anything as a national theater. And that is why I went to Japan. I started looking at their national theaters, and perhaps this is the major reason why I'm using Japanese theater as a platform for Filipinos to start learning about their own roots and about their own traditions. Okay, so let me go to my presentation. In August 2016, in commemoration of 10 years of no theater in the Philippines, Japanese performance tradition took center stage at the University of the Philippines Diliman, my university, with the UP Center for International Studies, UPCIS, that's my center. UPCIS Noh Theater's ensemble production of Cedula sa BGC, a Shinsaku Noh play based on an earlier work, Monumento, written by a former political detainee. Cedula is residence certificate. So we had that during the Spanish time, and to mark the start of the revolution, Filipinos had to rip or cut into pieces their cedula. So cedula sa BGC also featured the UPCIS Bunraku ensemble. It's not just Noh that we're teaching, we're also teaching Bunraku. We did Kabuki in 2003. And the puppet dance interpretation is that of the poem Pag-ibig sa Tinudbuang Lupa, or Love of Country, written by Andres Bonifacio, one of the leaders of the 1896 Philippine Revolution against Spain. His poem was set to music by one of the country's Kundiman composers, Dr Umali. I'm hoping I'm related to him. The Kundiman is a Philippine art song. And they say that it's much similar to the German Lied, but I do not know what a German Lied is. Okay, so 3 years earlier, in one gathering with Erickson Acosta, then recently released from political detention, my boss, the UPCIS director, suggested that the UPCIS Noh ensemble perform Acosta's Monumento as its next production. I knew I had to make the revolutionary Bonifacio return as a ghost through a Shinsaku Noh play after hearing my sociologist colleague passionately declare, Bonifacio's unfinished revolution for national liberation and democracy is the specter that haunts freedom-loving Filipinos, whose bid for just and lasting peace can only be satisfied when demands for national sovereignty and democracy are fulfilled. The Cedula sa BGC production was a result of a collaborative work with Noh grandmasters. Fortunately, Naohiko Mewaka, principal actor of the Kansas School of Noh, Shigeji Omura of the Okura School of Noh Drum, Jiro Fujita and Iso Yoji, 14th Iemoto, head of the school of the Iso School of Noh Flute, agreed to train the UPCIS Noh ensemble, and for this I am truly grateful. The drummer on the farmost side on the right is Omura Sensei. I am beholden to members of the UPCIS Noh Theater Ensemble for their support and cooperation. So these are the members, and I would like to acknowledge the presence of two who are with me right now. Our Shtekata, Diana Alferez, and Jeremy De La Cruz. So both of them performed the lead role, the Tekata, in Ang Paglalakbay ni Sisa, The Journey of Sisa, which I will talk about later. I am also grateful to various units of the University of the Philippines, because without their support, then there will be no theater in the Philippines. So that's them. And of course, we also have international partners. The University of Umewaka Sensei, Suwa, who allows him to go back to go to the Philippines to train our students. Of course, the Japanese Embassy in Manila, Japan Foundation. So it is really a collaborative work. And of course, to the faculty and staff of my center who have tirelessly supported my collaborative creative work of Japanese performance traditions. And Professor Umewaka has been going back and forth to the country for the last 10 years as our visiting professor and training our ensemble. So my involvement with Japanese performance tradition started with a desire to introduce Asian performance practices to Filipinos. We have been studying Asian theater as theory, but not its practice. So I am a product of the Theater Arts Department. Jeremy is a product of the Theater Arts Department. And when we study Asian theater, we read about Asian theater, or we watch videos about Asian theater. So we do not get to appreciate Asian theater. It was only when I went to Japan that I realized you have to practice Asian theater for you to be able to appreciate it. And that is what I brought with me to the Philippines. For Filipinos to start practicing Asian theater forms. So by creating performances using Japanese performance practice, then Filipinos are introduced to learning the skills needed to perform an Asian form. I have here some info about Noh, but I will skip that because we all know that already. Noh should not be taken as a direct artistic descendant of the literary works like Tale of Genji, Tale of the Heike, the main source material, because the narrative that's presented in Noh theater is a new one, something that is not found in the source material. Noh also differs from other earlier art forms like Dengaku, Sarugak, etc. in its aesthetic orientation and preoccupation with ghosts and the afterlife. So directing a production like this is different from the Western concept of directing, which is still very much practiced in the Philippines, although it has changed in the US. There is only one artistic vision, and that is the director's vision. Okay, so that's still practiced up to now in the Philippines. But in Noh theater, there is no director, because each master of the Noh theater serves as a director in his individual part of the performance. In our case, the sensei of each Filipino Noh performer is his or her director, and therefore is my collaborator. Likewise, the Filipino participants are equally my collaborators. I present the play's concept and structure to the sensei, and the artistic details of the Noh's tradition are interwoven, tailor-made, so to speak, into the work. But I feel that I should identify these 4 cultural phenomena that can be said to have played a major role in the beginnings of Noh in the Philippines. The first one, the West colonizing the East. So that's us, the Philippines, as mentioned by Professor Gulam earlier. That's our experience. Constant contact with Westerners has also colonized various Philippine art forms, including theater. That's 333 years of Spanish colonization, and about, they say 50 years, but maybe almost 100 years of American colonization, and you can say even up to now. In fact, this colonization also reached our art forms, including theater, and the theater forms often described as Philippine traditional theater, like Comedia or Sinaculo, or even the Zarzuela mentioned by Professor Gulam, were introduced by the Spaniards. The second, the East mimicking the West, is anchored in the perception called a colonized mindset, that the West represents what is outstanding and progressive, such that in Philippine theater, Euro-American productions are patronized and appreciated more than Asian and Filipino forms. Moreover, according to one Filipino theater scholar, Philippine theater has been evaluated in light of its Western counterpart, which is a sad thing. The third, the West studying the East, began when Western scholars took an interest in Asia, began to live here in Asia to study Asian culture and write about it. To this day, the main references used in theater studies in the university, especially that of Asian theater, are still written by Western scholars. The fourth, the East studying the East, saw Asians studying their own culture. They do it in two ways, intraculturally, the way the masters of Japanese traditions continue to study and master their own art form, and interculturally, when one Asian national studies the culture of another. So in the Philippines, we have that with our university professor emeritus, Amelia La Peña Bonifacio. Before I go into that, let me just show you some pictures and videos of the cedula sa BGC. So the masked person is Bonifacio. He returns as a ghost with his brother Procopio. They were theater performers, and they came back, they wanted to watch a play. That's Diana entering, because this is a combination of contemporary play interspersed with Noh. Diana is waiting for her entrance. So this is how we reinterpret the tearing of the cedula. The time when the revolution started, when Bonifacio decided to declare war against Spain. So the person playing the flute is actually a Filipina female student of statistics who learned to play the Noh flute. We had to request Obora Sensei to do this because it is quite difficult for our hip drummer to play this way. There, that's the tearing of the cedula. And because the masters were there, we wanted to show them the real thing. We wanted to show the Filipinos the real thing, so we requested the master to do a dance and accompanied by the shoulder drummer and the flutist, the masters. So back to Professor Amelia Bonifacio. So I mentioned earlier that she studied Asian theater, and the only one who pursued it further and devoted her life to it the way Asian masters do it, through her puppet theater troupe Teatro Mulat ng Pilipinas. There seems to be very little interest in the Philippines for the practice of Asian, more so our local performance traditions in the Philippines. The interest is limited to references in research publications. There are no active promotional efforts, and rarely have there been stage performances except in special occasions like town fiestas or festivities. In the case of my university, such occasion came during the Comedia Festival in 2008 and Sarsuela Festival in 2009, where they invited folk traditional performers to gather together and have their own performance at the university. The lack of popular awareness is in fact seen in the current questioning of the identity of Philippine theater. Given this situation, I believe there is a need to study Asia on a bigger scale in the Philippines and to expand the concept of theater and performance to also encompass Asian forms. So that is why I advocated the teaching of the practice of Asian performances to Filipinos, especially Japanese performance traditions. And this was made possible with the creation of the UP Center for International Studies in 2000, and consequently the subsequent institution of Japan Studies courses. Since Japanese performance traditions are an important aspect of Japanese culture, so it is being taught there. I raised the difficulty of Filipinos locally staging a Japanese traditional form. The different elements of Japanese traditional theaters are so highly specialized that none of us who trained with Japanese masters could claim mastery of the form. So despite my exposure to the different Japanese traditions, I had to call masters to teach our students. I never pretended I am a master and that I'm going to teach Kyogen or Noh or Kabuki to Filipinos. So at least I'm not one of them. The UPCIS decided the masters, as I mentioned earlier. And I have here several people and who have been instrumental in the Noh project in the Philippines. So, of course, the head of the center, the ambassador at that time, His Excellency Ryuichiro Yamazaki. He and Dr. Zayas, the head of the center, had a common friend in Naohiko Umewaka. So that is somehow serendipitous. So we personally invited him in the project. And Umewaka Sensei is just like Shigeyama Doji Sensei. They both speak English very well. And both studied at the Canadian Academy. So then there's less translation that I have to do. And then the Japan Foundation director at that time was Mr. Ben Suzuki, and he recommended the project to Japan Foundation. And the director of Japan Information Cultural Center, when she learned of our Noh project, came to see us to say that if we could tie up with them for the 2006 Philippines-Japan Friendship Day. That's a celebration of 50 years of diplomatic relations between those two countries. So with that, I suggested the staging of Paglalakbay ni Sisa Isang Noh sa Laguna as a Shinsaku Noh work. To me, La Peña Bonifacio's work showcases the marriage of the best and the finest of the two countries, Japan's Noh tradition, and the story of Sisa from the Filipino literary masterpiece Noli Me Tangere. And the theme is motherly grief over the loss of her sons. So Shinsaku Noh plays in Japan. A new text is staged in the Noh tradition with no mask, costumes, everything that you see in the Noh tradition, like accompanied by a small orchestra, the drums, and even played with the vocal music. The original intent of the playwright of Sisa is to use Filipino motifs. But for the purpose of the celebration of 50 years, I proposed the further appropriation of the performance elements of Noh. For it seemed to be a symbolic and perfect fit to celebrate 50 years of the renewal of diplomatic ties. So this Shinsaku Noh staging of Sisa contributed to the development of Noh practice in the Philippines. But there were three challenges that we had to deal with to achieve the objective. The first concerns the performers. In 2005, there was no practitioner in the Philippines, unlike ballet, opera, or Broadway musicals. We have many of them. So we had to assemble a group of Filipino performers who were willing to undergo the kind of training with Noh masters as practiced in Japan. So there are several prerequisites before an individual can perform a Noh piece. That is its physical capability, because the Noh dancer must prepare their bodies to do the kamae, the suriashi, the different katas. The performers must keep the body as still as possible. They should be open to learning a series of katas, the dancer, the musicians, etc. And since there's no Filipino body trained for that, we had to create a training program. Okay. And we had to prepare the audience because they had to be gradually exposed to Noh due to its overt contrast with contemporary Western and Filipino theater. So the next issue was related to the third, which is the need to introduce Noh in its most authentic form, respecting the traditional qualities of Noh, while at the same time giving a nod to the Filipino spirit of the material. So we had to respond to the one-year physical preparation of the body required by Umewaka Sensei, because he said, with fast movement like kabuki, you can gomakasu. cheat, but not with slow movement. So Umiwaka Sensei directed a contemporary play with elements of Noh, just so Filipinos will not be will be slowly accustomed to its looks. That's the coffee shop within the play. As we were training for the Noh, this is our posters when we did it. The celebration of 50 years, we performed Okina. And this is just to show you. You start with the walking. You have to make them walk like the way Doji Sensei made us walk and walk yesterday. Because they say that if you have mastered the walking, then 50% of Noh is already finished, the preparation for that. And then we also invited Fujita Sensei, he was training our students to play the flute. And then before the joint performance in 2006, we invited the other masters to train further. That's Omura Sensei training Dana. Male and female performers were given equal opportunity to train, but I don't know what's with female Filipinos, they got the role. So whoever masters the tradition first gets the role. So this is the snow stage that we built. We were trying to recreate the pre-electricity Noh stage, so we had a candlelit Noh play. And this is the joint performance. The first stecata, Diana Malahay, who is now in Canada, married and with a kid, played Senzai. Umiwaka Sensei considers her his #1 deshi son to this day, more than his own 2 children, because they really work so hard together. And we have 2 Filipino drummers in the performance. We were not lucky with the flute at this time. Okay, and this is a winning picture. One photographer took a shot of this. And that performance was hosted by then Foreign Minister Aso, and who eventually became Prime Minister, and also our Foreign Minister Romulo. And then we did the all Filipino Okina. Okina and Paglalakbay ni Sisa. But I don't have a video of that. I have a video of Jeremy's performance. This was covered by Reuters.
The University of the Philippines Center for International Studies, in partnership with Japan's Tsukuba University and Shizuoka University of Art and Culture, recently held a conference to strengthen global cultural exchange and diplomacy.
So, Umiwaka Sensei performed with our students, and that's Diana. Diana as the contemporary character.
Theatrical forms in existence. This Japanese theater art is a mix of music, dance, and drama, using subtle movements and poetic language.
Characteristics of Noh theater is that we wear a mask usually, and it's very stylized, that your heart is the movement. But because your heart is the movement, there are lots of deep suggestions.
That's Jeremy.
Audience must imagine many things. So it's, maybe you could say Noh theater is that it's a theater of imagination.
Audience was treated to a unique theater experience.
Okay. So, why a Shinsaku Filipino Noh play? I'm hoping that learning to appreciate the beauty of centuries-old Asian performances would hopefully inspire Filipinos, many of whom are held captive by Western culture, to reflect on our own Asianness and to take a look at our own local performance practices, especially on how we regard them, and see what measures are being done to ensure that they are performed, safeguarded, revitalized, and passed on to the next generation. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.